They forced me to sell my small cafe, but they didn't read the fine print. The rain was coming down in sheets that morning, an unrelenting torrent that seemed to mirror the storm brewing inside me. I stood at the window of my small cafe, watching as water pooled on the cracked pavement outside. The sign above the door still read Bella's Haven, a name I had chosen with so much hope and love when I first opened it 5 years ago. It wasn't just a business, it was my sanctuary, my dream carved into wood and brick, filled with scents of freshly baked croissants, brewed coffee, and warm cinnamon rolls. But today, none of that mattered. Today, it felt like everything I had built was slipping through my fingers like sand in an hourglass, no matter how tightly I tried to hold on. My family, my own flesh and blood, had made their decision for me. A week ago, they sat me down at the dining table in my childhood home, their faces stern and unyielding. My father spoke first, his voice heavy with authority, the kind he always used when he wanted something done without question. "We've talked about this," he said, leaning forward, his hands clasped together like a judge delivering a verdict. "It's time you let go of this obsession. This cafe isn't bringing you any real future. You're wasting your life here." I remember feeling the sting of his words like a slap across the face. Wasting my life? Was that what he thought? My mother chimed in next, her tone softer but no less resolute. "You could do so much more, sweetheart. Look at your cousins, they've all moved on to bigger things. Law degrees, corporate jobs, families of their own. Don't you want stability? Security?" And then there was my brother, who rarely said anything meaningful but chose that moment to chime in with his usual lack of tact. "Face it, sis. Your little coffee shop is cute and all, but it's not exactly changing the world. Selling it would be smart." Smart. That word echoed in my mind long after the conversation ended. Smart. Practical. Logical. Words they loved to throw around whenever they wanted to justify taking away someone else's happiness. For them, success was measured by titles, bank accounts, and societal approval. They didn't understand what Bella's Haven meant to me, not just as a business, but as a part of who I am. When I refused to agree, they turned up the pressure. Phone calls came daily, sometimes hourly, each one laced with guilt trips and thinly veiled threats. "Think about us," my mother pleaded during one call. "We only want what's best for you." And when that didn't work, they resorted to ultimatums. "If you don't sell the cafe, we'll have no choice but to cut you off completely. No support, financial or otherwise. Cut me off." As if being disowned was supposed to scare me into submission. But it did hurt, it hurt deeply. Because despite everything, I loved them. I wanted their approval, their pride in what I had created. Instead, all I got was disappointment, judgment, and pressure. Finally, I caved. Not because I believed they were right, but because I couldn't bear the thought of losing them entirely. So I signed the papers, handing over ownership of Bella's Haven to a developer who promised to turn it into another generic chain restaurant. The same day, I walked out of the lawyer's office feeling hollow, like a piece of my soul had been ripped away. 2 days later, I found myself sitting at the counter inside the cafe, staring blankly at the legal documents spread out before me. Something gnawed at the back of my mind, a nagging feeling that I hadn't fully processed yet. I picked up the contract again, flipping through the pages slowly, searching for something. Anything. That's when I saw it, the fine print. My heart skipped a beat as I skimmed over the clause buried deep within the agreement. It was subtle, almost invisible unless you were looking for it, but its implications hit me like a freight train. According to the terms, the sale wouldn't be finalized until the developer completed certain renovations and obtained specific permits from the city council. Permits that required community approval, a process that could take months, maybe even years, depending on how things went. A spark of hope ignited somewhere deep inside me. Maybe I wasn't completely powerless after all. If I could rally the community behind me, show them why Bella's Haven mattered, perhaps I could delay, or even stop, the sale altogether. The idea terrified me almost as much as it excited me. How could I possibly fight against someone with far more resources and influence than I had? But then I remembered all the people who had walked through these doors over the years, the regulars who greeted me by name every morning, the students cramming for exams in the corner booths, the elderly couple who shared slices of pie and stories of their youth. These weren't just customers, they were family in ways my actual family never understood. The next morning, I arrived at the cafe earlier than usual, armed with flyers and determination. I posted notices on the bulletin board outside, inviting everyone to a meeting that evening. The response was overwhelming. By 6 o'clock, the tiny space was packed wall-to-wall with familiar faces, and some new ones too. There were young professionals clutching laptops, parents with children perched on their laps, retirees sipping tea, and even a few local artists who frequented the open mic nights I hosted once a month. I stood behind the counter, gripping the edges tightly to steady my trembling hands. All eyes were on me, waiting for me to speak. For a moment, I froze, overwhelmed by the weight of their collective gaze. Then I took a deep breath and began. I know most of you have heard by now that Bella's Haven is, well, it's being sold. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, and I pressed on quickly before they could spiral into panic. But here's the thing, the sale isn't final yet. There's still a chance to save this place, if we work together. I explained the situation as clearly as I could, laying out the details of the permit requirements and the role the community played in granting, or denying, approval. When I finished speaking, the room fell silent. For a few agonizing seconds, I feared I had misjudged their loyalty, that they would simply nod politely and walk away. But then someone near the front raised their hand. "It's not just a cafe," the woman said, her voice firm. "It's a part of our neighborhood. We can't let it disappear." Others chimed in, echoing her sentiment. One man recounted how he proposed to his wife right here, at a corner table decorated with candles and flowers. A teenage girl tearfully admitted that she came here every day after school because it was the only place she felt safe while dealing with bullying. An older gentleman shared how the cafe reminded him of the bakery his late wife used to run, giving him comfort in her absence. Each story added fuel to the fire burning inside me. This wasn't just about saving a building, it was about preserving memories, connections, and a sense of belonging. And for the first time since signing those papers, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could pull this off. Over the following weeks, the cafe became ground zero for our campaign. Flyers plastered every lamppost and storefront within a mile radius. Social media buzzed with hashtags like #SaveBellasHaven and #OurNeighborhoodOurHome. Local news outlets picked up the story, amplifying our message beyond what I ever imagined possible. People poured in from neighboring towns, curious to see what all the fuss was about. Some stayed for a cup of coffee, others lingered for hours, drawn in by the warmth and camaraderie that seemed to radiate from every corner. Despite the growing momentum, the developer wasn't backing down. He sent representatives to town hall meetings, attempting to sway opinions with promises of job creation and economic growth. But we countered with passion and authenticity, sharing personal testimonies that painted a vivid picture of what Bella's Haven truly represented. Through it all, I found strength I didn't know I possessed. Late nights spent strategizing with volunteers, early mornings spent baking enough pastries to feed an army, endless phone calls and emails. It was exhausting, but also exhilarating. For the first time in years, I felt alive in a way that went beyond surviving. I was fighting for something bigger than myself, and it gave me purpose. Yet, looming over everything was the knowledge that my family still didn't approve. Every time I saw them, their disapproval hung thick in the air, palpable and suffocating. They didn't attend any of the rallies or meetings, choosing instead to distance themselves from what they called this ridiculous crusade. Their silence spoke volumes, a constant reminder of the rift between us. One evening, as I locked up the cafe after yet another long day, I paused to look around the empty space. In the dim light, shadows danced across the walls, casting eerie silhouettes of chairs stacked atop tables. Despite the uncertainty ahead, a strange sense of peace washed over me. This place wasn't just four walls and a roof, it was a testament to resilience, creativity, and human connection. Whatever happened next, I knew I had already won in one crucial way. I had reclaimed my voice. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I realized the battle was far from over. The developer was preparing to escalate his efforts, and tensions in the community were beginning to rise. Yet, amidst the chaos, there was a glimmer of hope, a fragile flickering flame that refused to be extinguished. For now, that was enough. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity, each one blending into the next like watercolors on wet paper. The campaign to save Bella's Haven had taken on a life of its own, growing beyond anything I could have envisioned. Volunteers poured in from all corners of the community, Students organizing social media drives, retirees drafting petitions, local artists painting murals on the cafe's exterior walls with messages like "This place matters" and "Community over chains." But for every step forward we took, it felt like 2 steps back loomed just around the corner. The developer wasn't idle. He began hosting glossy presentations at upscale hotels, inviting city officials and influential figures to wine and dine events where he painted his vision of progress: sleek glass facades, high-end retail spaces, and promises of revitalizing what he called a stagnant neighborhood. His words dripped with charm, but beneath them lay an undercurrent of condescension, a subtle dismissal of everything Bella's Haven stood for. I attended one of these presentations reluctantly, feeling out of place among the tailored suits and designer dresses. My jeans and hoodie marked me as an outsider, but I was determined to listen, to understand how he framed his case. As he spoke about modernization and economic upliftment, I clenched my fists under the table, forcing myself to stay calm. When the Q&A session opened up, I raised my hand hesitantly, unsure if anyone would even acknowledge me. To my surprise, the moderator nodded toward me. "This cafe isn't stagnant," I said, standing up despite the tremor in my voice. "It's alive. It's not just a building, it's a home for people who need somewhere safe to go, somewhere they can belong. Progress doesn't mean erasing what already works. It means building on it." The room fell silent. For a moment, I thought I'd made a mistake, exposing myself so openly. But then someone else stood up, a woman whose son had special needs, and shared how Bella's Haven had been one of the few places her child felt comfortable visiting. Another man spoke about finding solace here after losing his job. Another talked about meeting lifelong friends over cups of coffee. By the time the session ended, more than half the audience had rallied behind us. That night, as I walked home through the quiet streets, I allowed myself a small smile. We were making headway, chipping away at the polished veneer the developer tried so hard to maintain. Still, I couldn't shake the nagging fear that this victory might be fleeting. The battle wasn't just against him, it was against money, power, and the relentless march of change that often trampled over the things we held dear. Meanwhile, tensions within my own family reached a breaking point. They stopped calling altogether, their silence louder than any argument could have been. At first, I told myself it didn't matter, that I had chosen this path knowing full well the cost. But late at night, when the cafe was empty and the hum of fluorescent lights filled the air, doubt crept in like shadows stretching across the floor. Was I being selfish? Was I clinging to something that no longer served me, or worse, holding on to it out of spite? These questions haunted me, gnawing at the edges of my resolve. One particularly sleepless night, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. There was one of my father teaching me how to ride a bike, his face split into a rare grin as he ran alongside me. Another showed my mother braiding my hair before my first day of school, her hands steady and gentle. Even my brother appeared in some shots, laughing wildly as we splashed each other with water during summer vacations. Tears blurred my vision as I stared at those images. No matter how angry or hurt I felt, they were still my family. And yet they refused to see me, not as I truly was, but as they wanted me to be. Their love came with strings attached, conditions I couldn't meet without sacrificing pieces of myself. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Saving Bella's Haven wasn't just about preserving a physical space. It was about reclaiming my identity, my autonomy, my right to choose the life I wanted to live. As weeks turned into months, the fight intensified. The developer filed lawsuits claiming our efforts amounted to harassment, while we countered with evidence of zoning violations and procedural missteps on his part. Legal fees mounted, draining whatever savings I had left, but the community rallied around me once again. Fundraisers popped up everywhere, from bake sales to benefit concerts, and strangers donated anonymously online. Each act of kindness reinforced my belief that this wasn't just my battle anymore. It belonged to everyone who cared about Bella's Haven. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden hues across the cafe's windows, I sat outside watching a group of children play hopscotch on the sidewalk. Their laughter echoed through the street, mingling with the soft strumming of a guitar played by a street musician nearby. For a brief moment, everything felt perfect, like the universe had paused to let me catch my breath. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from an unknown number: "Meet me tomorrow at 8 p.m. Alone. Bring the original contract." My stomach churned as I read the message over and over. Who was this? What did they want? Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but deep down, I knew ignoring it wasn't an option. Whatever awaited me, I had to face it head-on. After all, hadn't I spent months learning that running only led to dead ends? The next night, I arrived at the designated location, a dimly lit park bench near the edge of town. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. As I waited, clutching the folder containing the contract, my mind raced with possibilities. Was this a trap? A last-ditch attempt by the developer to intimidate me into submission? Just as doubt began to consume me, a figure emerged from the shadows. To my astonishment, it wasn't the developer, or anyone associated with him. Instead, standing before me was my father. He looked older than I remembered, his shoulders slightly hunched, his hair streaked with more gray than I'd noticed before. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then, without warning, he sat down beside me, his eyes fixed on the ground. "I read the fine print," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "All of it." My heart pounded in my chest. "Why are you here?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. He sighed heavily, rubbing his temples as if trying to ward off a headache. Because maybe we were wrong. About everything." His admission caught me off guard, leaving me speechless. This was the man who had always been so sure of himself, so convinced that he knew what was best for everyone. Seeing him now, vulnerable, uncertain, was almost too much to process. "I don't expect forgiveness," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I need you to know. I'm proud of you. Of what you've done. Of who you are." Tears welled up in my eyes, blurring my vision. Part of me wanted to lash out, to demand answers for all the pain they had caused. But another part, the part that still loved him despite everything, understood that this moment was as difficult for him as it was for me. Before I could respond, he stood up abruptly, stuffing his hands into his pockets. "Think about what I said," he muttered before turning and walking away, disappearing into the darkness. I sat there for a long time after he left, the weight of his words pressing down on me. Forgiveness wasn't easy, and healing wouldn't happen overnight. But for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope, not just for Bella's Haven, but for my family as well. Little did I know, however, that the real storm was yet to come. The days following my father's unexpected visit were a blur of conflicting emotions. His words lingered in my mind like an unfinished melody, haunting yet hopeful. I replayed our conversation over and over, searching for meaning in his admission and wrestling with the anger that still simmered beneath the surface. Could I forgive him? Did I even want to? These questions swirled inside me as I continued fighting for Bella's Haven, each day bringing new challenges and revelations. The developer, sensing he was losing ground, escalated his tactics. He began targeting key members of our coalition, offering bribes or threatening lawsuits to intimidate them into silence. Some caved under the pressure, stepping back from the campaign. Others doubled down, their resolve only strengthened by his attempts to divide us. But the toll it took on everyone was undeniable. Late-night meetings became tense and exhausting, filled with debates about whether we should compromise or hold firm. Amidst the chaos, I received another surprise visitor, my mother. She arrived at the cafe one afternoon, her hands trembling as she clutched her purse. Unlike my father, she didn't mince words. "We've been fools," she said bluntly, sitting down across from me at the counter. "Your father, he's stubborn, but he loves you. We all do. And we've let pride get in the way of seeing what truly matters." Her confession caught me off guard. My mother had always been the voice of reason in our family, the mediator who smoothed over disagreements, but this time, there was no smoothing. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and for the first time, I saw her not as the woman who had tried to mold me into someone else, but as a person grappling with her own regrets. "I'm sorry," she whispered, reaching out to take my hand. "For everything." I wanted to pull away, to protect myself from the vulnerability she was showing me. But instead, I squeezed her hand gently, feeling the warmth of her touch, a reminder of all the times she'd held me when I was little, comforting me through scraped knees and broken hearts. In that moment, forgiveness felt less like a choice and more like a release, a letting go of the weight I'd carried for so long. With renewed determination, I threw myself into the final push to save Bella's Haven. The city council meeting where the permits would be decided was only days away, and every second counted. Flyers turned into banners, social media posts turned into viral campaigns, and word of mouth spread faster than wildfire. People lined up outside the cafe to sign petitions, share stories, and offer whatever support they could. It was as if the entire neighborhood had banded together, united by a shared purpose. On the morning of the meeting, I woke up early, my stomach twisted with nerves. The cafe buzzed with activity as volunteers gathered supplies, rehearsed speeches, and prepared for what promised to be a pivotal day. When we arrived at City Hall, the scene was surreal. Hundreds of people filled the auditorium, spilling out into the hallways and onto the steps outside. Supporters wore makeshift badges reading "Save Bella's Haven" and held signs bearing messages of solidarity. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope, not just for victory, but for the power of community. The hearing itself was intense. Both sides presented their cases passionately, the room crackling with tension. When it was my turn to speak, I stepped up to the podium, my heart pounding in my chest. Looking out at the sea of faces, friends, neighbors, strangers who had become allies, I drew strength from their presence. "This cafe isn't just a business," I began, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "It's a testament to resilience, creativity, and connection. It's a place where people find joy, comfort, and belonging. Progress shouldn't come at the expense of what makes us human. Let's build a future that honors our past, not erases it." Applause erupted around me, echoing through the chamber like thunder. As I returned to my seat, I glanced toward the back of the room and spotted my parents sitting quietly, watching me with expressions I couldn't quite read. Their presence surprised me, but in that moment, I chose to focus on the task at hand. After hours of deliberation, the council announced their decision: the permits would not be granted. The developers' plans were rejected, leaving Bella's Haven standing tall, for now. In the weeks that followed, life began to settle into a new rhythm. The cafe thrived once again, its walls adorned with artwork celebrating the community's triumph. Customers streamed in daily, sharing laughter, stories, and gratitude. Strangers became regulars, and regulars became friends. The sense of camaraderie was palpable, a living reminder of what we had fought so hard to preserve. My relationship with my family slowly began to heal. Conversations replaced silences, apologies replaced accusations, and understanding replaced judgment. It wasn't perfect, we still had moments of tension and disagreement, but it was progress. Together, we learned to navigate the complexities of love, forgiveness, and acceptance. One evening, as I locked up the cafe after closing, I paused to look around the empty space. The faint scent of coffee lingered in the air, mingling with the soft glow of string lights hanging from the ceiling. Outside, the streetlights cast pools of golden light onto the pavement, illuminating the mural painted on the wall, a vibrant depiction of the cafe surrounded by smiling faces. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Bella's Haven wasn't just a dream anymore, it was proof that even in the face of adversity, beauty could endure. And though the battle had changed me in ways I never expected, it had also shown me the strength of the human spirit and the power of standing together. As I walked home under a canopy of stars, I realized something profound. Sometimes, the hardest fights are the ones worth having. Because in the end, it's not just about saving a place, it's about finding yourself along the way.